The South African Weather Service has issued several warnings as inclement conditions remain in large parts of the country due to a strong cold front. Maximum daytime temperatures are expected to remain in the single digits in areas, with Gauteng expected to also be freezing. Professor Guy Midgley, Acting Director for Climate Studies at Stellenbosch University, joins us now to discuss what we are seeing taking place in the country at the moment. Prof, I see you're on brand with the weather there with your beanie. Good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us and hope that you're staying warm. I think I'm going to start with the question that everybody really, it sits at the back of our minds when we see extreme weather like this. I mean, there's snow in central parts of the country, very hard to imagine that could even be possible for us in this day and age. But is this a climate or a weather incident?
Well, it's always going to be, excuse me, and thanks for having me. It's always a combination of both these days because we have now warmed the climate by quite a significant amount, and we've warmed our oceans by quite a significant amount through global warming. So the fingerprint of our climate change is in every single weather event. The question is just how much of it is present and how unusual the weather event is. But to be honest, winter cold fronts are a feature of South African weather, particularly of Cape Town weather.
Yeah.
As you can see, I'm in Cape Town. It's very chilly. We have very high winds, though, and very high wave heights impinging on Cape Town on the south coast. So in a way, it's possible that there's some signal of climate change in the high winds and the very high waves. But that's very difficult to, it's very difficult to say that with any precision because we don't have records of those sorts of measures for a very long time.
Yeah, and what we're going to do obviously is take a look at really what the weather forecast is saying so that we can help everyone get ready and get their day looking interesting. But as you look at this particular movement of this cold front, any sort of surprises and how it's playing itself out? I mean, the temperatures are quite frightening. I mean, we're talking about in some areas temperatures not going to surpass 4 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, it's miserable.
Yeah.
I think it's particularly bad because, a week and a half ago, we had very warm weather for quite a long period of time. And it comes as a shock to the system when, you go from such warm weather to such cold weather. And it's that sudden change, I think, which catches people off guard. And particularly people who are living in houses or dwellings that are not adequately prepared. And, one thinks of people living in shacks, living in informal settlements. This is very, very risky and threatening for people like that. And it's heartbreaking. We were caught off guard by a few weird little events. We had an episode of sleet around Stellenbosch, which caused a lot of vehicles to go off the road on the way to work yesterday or the day before. And sleet is very, very unusual. It's a form of frozen rain, and it's very dangerous for drivers who are not familiar with it. So we saw many, many fender benders and quite serious ones on the Helshoogte pass outside Stellenbosch, for example. So you've got to be awake to these warnings, and our weather service gives us very, very good warnings. And you just got to listen to them.
Yeah, and I suppose even when you are hitting the roads, then, I mean, you talk about sleet where if you've lost control of that car, it's really, really difficult to get back that control. So really important for us to be sober-minded as we drive in various parts of the country today. Talk to me about this, whether or not, I mean, one of the first questions I asked you was if it's a climate or weather phenomenon. I wonder if we're resourced enough in South Africa to be able to answer that question on an ongoing basis, right? You've talked quite a lot over the years about us needing to put more resources behind climate financing and certainly research, climate research rather. And I'm giving you an opportunity here to speak to the new Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, Dr. Deon George, who's just taken over that very important post.
Well, thanks for that opportunity. Yes, indeed. I've long maintained that countries that adapt to the current changes in climate and the changes that we anticipate for decades to come will be the more successful countries. Countries that fail to adapt are going to run into significant problems and get caught off guard. There is a lot of evidence that shows that good investment into weather services pays back that investment many, many times to one. So it makes zero sense for the Treasury, for the fiscus to withhold investment into weather services, because all of us, all South Africans, will benefit from that investment, and it pays itself back many, many times over. So we really do need to invest into careers in weather prediction and weather modeling, and all the the high-end skills, the scarce skills that are needed in weather services, because these will pay the country back for decades to come, and our children will thank us for that excellent investment. And those investments include people, good careers, good institutions, and good instruments to measure the climate with.
Yeah, just give us some tips on how to deal with this weather. I mean, one of the things that we've heard, of course, is that we must also be careful using, whatever heating implements that we may be using. For some, it may be little fires, and, in informal settlements, what we call an imbaula. So let's talk a little bit about those tips on how to stay safe, because it is some of the most vulnerable communities that are hard hit at times like these. And then some things to think about as we move about.
Well, risk of flooding. Just be aware of the risk of flooding in your area. Heating your spaces. I mean, you're caught between a rock and a hard place. One's got to warm your space, but as safely as possible. And there are all sorts of problems with small fires in closed spaces, which can cause breathing asthma problems and other sorts of issues. And then I think when going outdoors, just make sure you know what's going on around you and be prepared to protect yourself against heavy rain, possibly hail, and freezing conditions, because those catch you off guard. Just like heat waves, they can be deadly. And on the road, be exceptionally careful on the road. Really reduce your speed, because once you lose control and you start a hydroplane, there's very little you can do. And even if you're driving a high-end 4x4 Mercedes-Benz or something, it can happen to you. So we shouldn't think that we're immune.
Yeah. And of course, the kids are going back to school today. Earlier this week, we spoke to the Department of Education in the Western Cape just to talk about, readiness of kids going back to school. And one of the things that we heard was that, well, government still needs to consult the experts. I mean, do you think that that's happening, I suppose, as consistently and quickly as it should happen when we do have weather climate events?
Oh, no, I do think so. I think we're quite rare internationally as a country in which government consults experts on weather in a very direct way. So we have good communications between the scientific community, between weather services, and between government officials at multiple levels: local, regional, provincial, and national. So we're lucky in that sense, and we're privileged in the science community to be able to have those connections and to at least be able to provide guidance when we can.
Yeah.
So, but hopefully we can continue that and continue to make a difference as much as possible.
Yeah, well, it's really important work, and thank you so much for bringing us up to speed on where we are in the impact of climate change and as to how it starts to trickle down to our weather events, especially when we see extreme weather like what we're seeing right now. Professor Guy Midgley is with Stellenbosch University, Acting Director for Climate Studies at Stellenbosch University.